Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 29th of March 2020. Now this will be another large talk this week. I don't plan it like this. I honestly don't sit down and decide what I'm going to talk about. I do look through stories during the week sometimes, or even the day before, and just collect a few just to mention if they are warranted at all, and I'll read them. But I prefer just to let it come on spontaneously. I've always done the same thing, and it's more natural, isn't it? I like to talk to people the same way. If I see people in person, you've got to be natural about things, not this pretentious nonsense that you're trained to believe. And folk actually emulate the characters in television news programs, the anchor people that they've grown up with. They try to emulate how they pause and look sternly and how they pronounce things. And it's so unnatural. If someone came into your house and sat across the table for a cup of tea or something, you'd think they were a robot if they did that kind of thing in your presence, you see. So I'd rather just be quite natural. So, because it's a long talk, just like last week, I'll split it up for those that want it, and I'll do the whole program for those who want to download the whole thing on my website, cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And I'll also split up into parts as well, so that you can bring down each segment if you want to. Some folk like to upload them too, so it may be easier for them if it's all broken up as well. But for the rest of the people, just continue with the talk, and I'll go right through however long it'll end up being. And that's how we'll do. I always like to tell you that I hope that you're all doing pretty well as can be expected, with apart from all the usual things that happen in life to us all at some time or another in different ways. And the problems that people have with even getting work. If today you're put off your work, if you have any at all, and you're locked down for most people too, as we go through this massive experiment, which really has... I gave talks years ago on this very thing, even in the late 90s, and then the SARS one in 2003, then other outbreaks after that too in 2009-10, and so on. But back in the 90s, I mentioned the fact that eventually you would be made to take some kind of chip or ID chip or something, which would be electronically tagging you, and you wouldn't walk into a supermarket eventually without it, and you'd have to have your vaccinations up to date, or alarms would go off, and all the fingers would point at you, and then you'd be dragged off. And these things are coming down the pike because, you see, you're living in an incredible agenda, and most folk can never get that through their heads. It doesn't matter, even if you show them, you can't help most folk who don't want to know. It's a choice to know things. And if you choose not to know, then they feel that they don't have to be involved in anything except to go along with orders or prompts that they get from the behaviorists that run our lives today, and run them through their fictional movies and dramas, and on the internet too. The internet's incredibly well organized and run by behaviorist teams, BITs, that prompt you to go tell the sites they want you to go, and not to look up the actual sites you're trying to get to. We're so incredibly managed, and folk have no idea just how intense it is. We've come an awful long way, really, in 20, 30 years, basically. And don't forget, too, that even the internet was set up by ARPA. They became DARPA, and they set it up, really, during the Cold War, back in the 50s and 60s. And they were running their games with Russia back and forth for a long time. So the internet as such was highly developed. And I know people who have been able to buy some of the equipment from the 1970s and 80s, from the NSA, it's used stuff, old stuff, and so on. And the old stuff really was high definition, and a lot of the computer types of stuff was way faster than they're even selling to you today. We're living in a fool's paradise in some way, but it could also be a hell for those that know. It's true enough. You can only be a fool in a paradise if you don't know what's going on, and you don't care to know. And they say ignorance is bliss. But you truly are living through an amazing agenda. And back in the 90s and later too, I mentioned that to get the whole agenda through would take wartime scenarios, either outside attack. And of course, the 9/11 came along, and that brought in the first half of it. And then it would be economic. And we got the crash 2007, 2008. And money literally, since 2008 in Canada for sure, because we borrowed from the US Federal Reserve, by the way, to bail us all out. And we're still paying for all. The dollar in Canada was from 2008 onwards, dropped in real purchasing power by a good almost, well, it's almost 50, 60% for certain items, no doubt about it. Food is probably tripled in price or more, or quadrupled in price, especially meat, and they want to wean you off it. But anyway, in wartime scenarios, real, imaginary or fictitious or whatever, are using the war on a virus. They bring in basically the same martial law type scenarios, Emergency Powers Acts. I've got them all the different things here. And they can do whatever they want. And like again, back in the 90s, I talked about how you steer the public. The public go to sleep, or like they say we're like cattle grazing in fields, or sheep. Sheep's pretty good for that too. And if it's a nice sunny day and there's not much happening as you go through life, it's an eternal sunny day in your mind, and you're playing yourself and having a good time. It's hard for them at the top with all the big massive think tanks who are directing the future and where they want you to go and your children to go and grandchildren and so on. It's hard to get you to move and accept things when you're peaceful and happy. And the longer you're at it, chewing the grass you see in that beautiful field there, the less you want to. You'll say, "No, I'm not budging." Well, once you get this going, the stampede, and you get the horror, and there's the cattle, this like Rick Rawhide, the movie, the series on TV, Rawhide. Don't try to understand them. Just move them and brand them. And so you get them stampeding, and they're wild-eyed, and and even you can't tell once they're wild-eyed and they're really getting them going, they lose their minds, and it's easy to steer them by people at the front and the sides to nudge them along in the direction they want them to go. And once you've got people really stampeding, the technique is not to let them settle down then. If you've got a whole list of things to accomplish, that's the time to move them here, then move them there, and they keep moving, and they'll do what they're told, you see, because they're panicked. And so it's the first thing in warfare. It's astonishing to realize, as I've said, so we've never had a generation of people who've had complete peace in their life. We haven't been allowed that. I keep saying we get financial crashes at least 2 or 3 a century, the big ones. You're plundered. Your economies are totally plundered by the big banks and the stock market and the people who manage it all for themselves. And then you have wars. They give you wars. And it isn't for often a whole generation later that they'll really tell you and start to sneak out books and deep, because now it's taken off the official secrets, and you find that the real reasons for war completely different, really, and deceitful from what they told the public at the time. If they tell the people at the time the truth, they won't go off to war. So you must, again, always, even if you want to invade someone, then you've got to pretend that you're being invaded first, even if you're not. It's amazing the double think and double speak that goes on to get you to go off. But once the killing starts and some of your own people get killed, it's easier then to instill the hate and the rage and retribution and vengeance and a way, and that can carry on for a long time. So we don't get peace. We're not given peace. We're not allowed peace, because peace would break down the system that we live under. And it's an incredible system. It's nothing, as I've said so many times, like the system that you're brainwashed to believe it is, with your talking heads on TV and the people who are on your authorized shows and so on. it's a vastly different system. And it isn't new when I say it's run by experts or people who claim they're experts. Now they claim they're really into many more advanced science than the people of Julian Huxley's day or even H.G. Wells's day. But you'd be surprised just how scientific, as far as data collection on the public, they had at the end of the 1800s in places like Britain, especially, and then into the 20th century. And the mass propaganda outfits, it's just astonishing the marketing techniques used to get wars started and to keep them going and so on. It's like Edward Bernays. Again, he's given a lot of credence or accolades for being one of the top marketers who can, and a persuader of people, you see, through marketing techniques by supposedly understanding the subconscious motives for the people have for buying things, and they're not really conscious of the drives inside of them. And don't forget that Bernays, his uncle was Freud. So you've got this, you've got people like Freud and Bernays who specialize in sussing out their victims, put it that way, to get them to do what you want them to do. And many more, of course. Now it's even more sophisticated. But even back then, Bernays was approached by the cabal who wanted a war, World War I, for America. Don't forget that Britain was already in it from 1914. And they just set up that year too, 14. That's why they set up the central bank system and the Federal Reserve in America, in order to tax the public for a coming war. Just like the Bank of England. The Bank of England could loan to other countries and banks and so on. And they put the public, the whole population of Britain down as a guarantors to pay it off through, and would take it off by taxes, the Foreign Income Tax Act. So the US had to be the same. So they gave it different names for the same system, exactly the same system. And they brought in Warburg from Germany and made him, one of the brothers, the one who was still in Germany, the head of the bank. And they lent to every country for 3 years. Massive returns, maybe 200-300% interest from nations that might lose. You charge incredible interest rates. And then come 1917, they said, we better get in there, get Americans in there to make sure that this war goes the way we want it to go, so we can start getting all our payments back on to the bankers, you see. And that's what they did. That's why America went in. And Bernays was approached. I had to see how they approached. He was part of the same cabal, actually. They all knew each other and worked with each other. And he helped to get America in the war, propagandizing stories and so on. They even brought out a newspaper for themselves and gave all the different stories that they wanted to get the people really in a rage to go to war. Then after the war was over, being a good psychopath, and psychopaths love to boast, you know, he wrote another book about how they deceived Americans and conned them into going to war. This is the reality. This is not a conspiracy theory, you know. It's written by the people who were involved in it, like Bernays himself. And you have to get yourself out of the little rut. Say, oh, that was a little quirk in time. You know, there was a little one-off thing. No, it wasn't. I mean, Bernays himself he actually worked for many US governments, and this public-private partnership was not that new, really. It depends who the master is. And Bernays literally got America, he got the government to send troops to Latin America to overthrow any people who were trying to be socialist. And he had the American Fruit Company as a client, massive client, and massive shares of his own in it. And they elected a guy who wanted to start spraying some of the wealth inside the country instead of getting taken out to shareholders in America. And Bernays managed to, he actually set up another big propaganda newspaper and a film crew, and put out in the cinemas how evil this country was and how terrible it was and how socialist it was and how they take down the nation, etc. But it was all in order to get America to send the troops down and kick the guy out. And America's been doing that kind of thing ever since. So that's only one little thing, and it's got nothing to do really what I'm talking about tonight, except the system in which we live is a system with incredible think tanks that work full-time. It's hard for you to imagine. These aren't little guys that go into hobbies and just come and meet once. No, real think tanks. They're think tanks for the foundations, are a department of the foundations. And there are many, many foundations run by the big multi-billionaires. And most of the billionaires you'll never really know. You'll see the front ones for them. They always put front men out there pretending to be self-made people and so on, or geniuses. That's how it's done. And it's good enough for the public. I mean, why should they be lying to you, But the fact is, they lie to you because they never want you to have any truth at all. They want you to be like a sponge that just soaks up the propaganda that's dished out daily to you, so you'll behave in the right way. The think tanks plan futures, just like big business projects and business plans. And some of these big companies, if you read their projects from say 1960 and 70, they were doing 50-year plans of where they would take their company, and in the process, some of them, massive companies, take the world with them, or the nations with them. They don't just take the companies. Everything. It's very much like an organism, these corporations. And this applies to tyrants too, and tyrannical peoples at times. Not just individual tyrants. But if you move in, if you look at a field will have different wildflowers and herbs and grasses that will grow over time in that field, and some will take over from some, and then the old ones die off as the new ones take over and take all the nutrients. And that in other words, an organism alters the terrain for its own survival. Very important to understand that. It alters the terrain. And corporations are the same way. Other things are too, but corporations are definitely the same way. They're set up not just with business and profit. They've got a mandate, and they create a whole mystique about themselves to their employees, for instance. But like a cause, they've got causes. They make sure they've got causes too, and they're charitable causes as well, and we're part of the community, etc. But they have a big, massive project to try to get the public to believe the same thing, that they are part of the community or part of the nation, and so on. It used to be a slogan for many, many years that what was good for GM was good for America, and even presidents said that occasionally. That's how interwoven the system is with commerce, massive commerce and wealth and so on. So don't just poo-poo think tanks thinking it's all a bunch of old characters that go in there with smoking pipes and they just chat and stare at the ceiling and vocalize their dreams. It's completely different. It's highly organized. Some of these foundations have as much bureaucracies, and some corporations too have as much bureaucracies as some governments have, and like civil servants and staff and departments. And you've got to understand how it really works, because you see, what you're living in today is the culmination of many of these think tanks working together. And it's a pyramid style, because there's a snob appeal involved, and definitely a gang mentality, a very well organized gang mentality to those that run the world. I think if you read basic sociology and political sciences, they'll go into, they're kind of like clubs that start off, and gentlemen's clubs long ago, and so partly true, but it's much, much deeper than just that, of the wealthy elite starting. This has gone on for at least pretty openly in some ways from the 1700s that we can detect, And people don't know it, that you had the Lunar Society. It's called the Lunar Society. That met, every time in the full moon, I think it was, in the US, and they travelled back and forth back then in Britain, and they really did communicate through their writings and so on with each other all the time. And the Rothschild at the time was one of them, and some inventors were part of it too, and I know who they were. And they literally, the idea was to plan the kind of society they were going to bring in through science and financing of certain sciences. See, other sciences get nowhere if you can't get funding. So money is the key to everything today, and has been for a long time. If you hold the purse strings of a nation, and the government, the heads of government must come to you every year, which they all do, cap in hand, for borrowing more money for their big massive projects, which of course the lender is so happy to encourage them to go into and give money here and give money there and create more debt, which means more taxation. It pays off the lender himself. So it's quite a nice, cozy setup they have at the top. But again, they've got societies, or brotherhoods, if you like, to make sure it all works that way. The CFR is one of them. Everybody talks about masonry, but you look into where these characters go. CFR is one of them, Council for Foreign Relations. The Royal Institute for International Affairs is a big one, massive one, who helped set up, in fact, actually directed the whole system before it was even called that name, but it was the Lord Alfred Milner Group with the kindergarten. And they literally ran the British Empire. The members of it ran the British Empire, and they pointed each other to government positions and commercial positions too, and literally ran the world's wealth. Nothing has changed, they still do. And have the divisions for the Far East, for the unification of the Far East countries and so on, the Pacific Rim countries. They have members in China, they've got members in Japan, and all over the place. And they also have the Council on Foreign Relations in America. And they've got the European Council on Foreign Relations now for most or all of the European members of Parliament. All basically is a private club, folks. And whoever joins them swears allegiance to them first and foremost. So don't think that politicians are serving your country. They're not serving your country. They've already given their oaths to something else. But they have a big agenda. And it's not just developing as we go along. They get what they want, as I say, through how to make this happen. And they'll have plan A, B, C, and D. And like a big business plan, they can say this might take us 20 years, 30-year plan, 40-year plan for this part, and so on. And that's how it's done. Like the United Nations. Same as the United Nations. Who set up the United Nations? The same organization, Royal Institute for International Affairs. They set up the League of Nations back then, you see, the first one. The World Bank they set up. The IMF they set up, the Bank for International Settlements, all the private institutions, they own them themselves, the ones at the top who own the organizations. And they plan the world. And they plan the world's direction, minutely, through the countless think tanks underneath them, like massive bureaucracies. Those that governors, basically, they're governors of the world, unelected governors, they're appointed in a definite, almost like a military-type system. I have no qualms about dealing with the general population. I've gone through so many talks in the past. And remember, you can go to cuttingthroughthematrix.com website, into the archives, and listen to the talks I've given over many, many years. And I go through the different characters that pop up in our history, in our recent past and present time too, who shaped the culture that we grew up in, basically. They designed it, they planned it, and they promoted it, and were held up as heroes to the certain class that ruled the world. And it is a system of a class, not just the upper classes, it's above even that. These are characters who really are banded together in what they claim is a moral duty as they enrich themselves to save the world, or save a society, or what they claim is the betterment of society. The Georgia Guidestones is only one monument to put up. You'll get taught their monuments just by learning what they teach in universities and modern social sciences and so on. As you get indoctrinated into their projects, and they get a lot of lesser workers that actually work their projects for them, and who are also well rewarded as long as you parrot the right mantras. Not so long ago, I remember hearing, and they give you the front people who get sudden publicity because stars, the star-making machinery for actors and musicians is a massive business to make people stars, regardless of whether they have talent or not. But the same star-making machinery makes scientists, for those who haven't caught on to that. An old technique too, in Bernays' days, he was up doing it as well. And they would get people like Einstein, who was more of advocating social policies and so on for the planet, as opposed to a scientist. But they promote him as a genius, and that's how it was done. And they still do it today. They give you the front people that seem to, you have these visions of a small planet, and these big, tall people with big, long strides, striding over it, the designing, giving you the new kind of cars that you're going to drive, and this, that, and the other, and how you're going to live. And they're being projected to you as though and promoted to you as though you should just listen to them. Somehow they're geniuses, and you really believe it. Most people believe what they can't fathom that. No, these are front people for much bigger purposes. As I say, how come everyone who gets to the multi-billionaire class in the sciences mainly that we're all using today, which help to indoctrinate and enslave us again, how come they all suddenly just get to a point, a certain dollar value, and they say, oh my God, I think there's too many people of the wrong kind, and but I'd like to vaccinate them all and make them healthy, but there's just too many people. We know who Bill Gates has said that, of course, before, and it's up on YouTube still. You hear the clips, he talks about it. But it's amazing that they're all on board with the same project. They suddenly want to be philanthropists, but they don't do anything outside a certain narrow vision. They all come along on this board with this exact same program, which is not normal either. If you have so many people, you think, I'll go off and do this kind of thing, but you say, oh well, it's up to them. But no, they're all on board with this, and with each other too. So once again, you're back to that kind of club aspect. They use the club, and they're all on board with the same thing. They're sworn to it, and they back each other up. And they've been given power, like the Royal Institute for International Affairs said, with the CFR too, their American branch. They said some years ago, and I read the articles at the time, where they said there's time for the big philanthropists to take their proper position in governance, global governance. Well, wait a minute. You've just knocked any idea of democracy out the window, although democracy has been a bit of a fake up until now, of course. But it's knocked out the window. You can't have them both. You can't have appointees, self-appointees at that, by a particular private club, over all of, but that's what we've got, through public-private partnerships, etc., etc. But they have big agendas. And don't forget, the agendas are always the same. There's too many of you, all the way from Thomas Malthus right up to the present time. Every one of them that was hailed as somehow a genius or a philosopher, like Bertrand Russell, who was really a mathematician. But his big thing was social change. Again, the same social change that's like a mantra to the brotherhood. There's too many of you, and you should all live this way. And many of you shouldn't have children at all. You should be sterilized, and on and on and go. And then again, most folk actually turn round. If you're well indoctrinated and brainwashed, just through your education and watching TV and so on, you're getting bits and bytes all the time. You're accumulating in your brain. You say, well, yeah, there's too many people. There's too many of the wrong people. And it never dawns on them that you're all being used. And when you adopt viewpoints that have emotional tang to it, especially, you're being used. Because your emotions then really surpass your reasoning, and you go along with something because it feels good, it feels better, yeah. But you don't realize that, okay, if you eliminate this group here because they're unfit for whatever you've claimed they're unfit for, then who's to come down to you one day and say, wait a minute, it's time for you to take the big dive as well, because we don't need you anymore. You're useless eater. And that's basically what Julian Huxley said himself, a guy who helped set up a good part of this agenda you're living through today. on behalf of the elite of the world. His family claimed that they were a scientific family because they could put across ideas to the public. There's kind of social sciences, you see, and psychologists and psychiatrists and behaviorists, and they're all part of the scientific network that manage the system on behalf of the ones above them, the dominant minority, they call them. Hasn't changed. And these are the guys who, long before Adolf Hitler started off with his hygiene, his German hygiene programs were to get rid of the unfit and so on in the hospitals. He got the ideas from Britain, especially from the elite group we're talking about now, that are all over the place now. But back then, most of them, not all of them, were in Britain. The rest of them were in the parts of the US and the CFR. But yeah, they got all the ideas. Hitler actually went ahead, and again, don't forget that in Coldstream Harbor in the US, the big eugenics organization set up there and funded by Rockefeller and the rest of them, to do with creating better types of people, better genetic types of people, and breeding the proper genes in them, and using cattle ranchers' data on breeding cattle. That's what they used initially, to try to adapt it into breeding people. And they also wanted to start culling off their own kind of people, which they did. They sterilized them the exact same way that H.G. Wells promoted in his early books, because H.G. Wells was another employee to push the myth-making machinery of doing good to help society by reordering society and sterilizing the unfit and so on. Little H.G. Wells was truly a frontman for a much bigger organization. And he took initially the left-hand path of socialism, labor, even though he'd never lifted anything heavier than a fork in his life, I think. And he belonged to the Fabian Society, co-founder of it. And so you're looking at a system well organized that makes sure that they run every side of everything. If you've got a class or a point of view or whatever it happens to be, they've already got ready-made leaders for you, very well organized, well funded. Well, it's easy to have funding if you just have the guys who literally not just print it up, but put the extra zeros behind the numbers and computers for nations. You can't fail, can you? And that's what it is. But Bertrand Russell was quite blatant about it, and he said, yes, we need a good Black Death, a bubonic plague every generation or so to cull off the useless types and infirm and feeble types and the poorer types. Quite open about it. And he also said that the future they'd bring in, he and his brotherhood class that he belonged to, he said, well, by means of diet, injections and injunctions, we shall bring it in, their order in, basically, on the general population. To make us really obedient, you see, and cull us off, make us stupid as well. And, of course, you also had Aldous Huxley, brother of Julian, writing his books, and he was up there, and he knew. That's why he came up with Brave New World way back in the 1930s, early 30s, 1932, 33, with literally a class system where the people were bred for their functions right down to the lower orders, basically. They wouldn't get too bored or go crazy by doing the same repetitive kind of work that robots eventually would do. And they were still on the board with the same thing. I remember a professor too in Australia a few years ago. I got another star that they make these stars up, and they get all the airtime suddenly, all of a sudden, and the papers immediately jump on board. What do you think of Professor so-and-so when he says, we've got to start bringing down the population mandatorily, you see? And the older folks should just die off. Maybe, he's talking about euthanasia, rather than collect pensions and be a drag on society. He's forgetting that their pension money that they sunk in all their whole working lives kept the system going and was invested in countless things on behalf of their masters. We've all got the same masters, you see. And they don't want you to claim any of it back when you retire. They want you to take it all. But the definition for a good from the United Nations, a good global citizen is a good producer and a consumer. You can look it up from their own website. And once you're retired, you see, you're now consuming. That's how they put it down. You think this is little children that just came up with this idea of sustainability and they're ready to kill for it and knock down and you know, all that kind of stuff. All you nasty people who ruined the world, all you ordinary folk, you know. It's all your fault. Do you think they just dreamed this up themselves? They've been utterly brainwashed into it, radicalized through all of their education from an early age at school. And the schools have got all the toolkits to make sure they're really radicalized and also dysfunctional in any other possible way. And they're ripe for revolution against the targets that they've been told ruined the world for them. Taking all the resources and polluting it's all your fault. That's done on purpose. If you had a natural system that was all real, and you've got natural overlords watching this from the real society, the real present society that you belong to, the people who would try to radicalize them would have been put behind bars, including the teachers, for what's coming down the pike, folks. It didn't happen all by chance. Nothing ever does. We live in myths, you know. It's like the myth, all have foundation myths, some nations. And some of them are nice and quaint, etc. Like the Romulus and Remus idea for Rome, you know. That kind of thing. Kind of quaint things. And they're good stories, actually. I like the stories. We all do. We like mythologies, but they still make all the founding myths. And you get the ones by the revolutionaries themselves. Revolutions are famous for making up myths. You have to look at the communist system, where literally every school child, right through its entire generational existence of communism, the communist state, the Soviet Socialist Republic, every child had to learn it by heart. Oh, this is what Lenin thought about this, and this is what Marx thought about that, and they had to parrot this stuff, and every exam had it in it, and so on and so on and so on, regardless of what the topic was, you know. And we're living through that same system in the West. Folk don't know it. When you go into anything that happened in the past, you got to bring the present into it. And how would this really be seen through the eyes of a so-and-so, one of the many varieties of angst that we have today in our PC culture? Of course we're getting taught it all. And folk think it's the same system run on behalf of the global elite. The US itself, it's not to put any country down, the people are the people, but by God, the US, just like the British folk are now, you know, they've been incredibly abused. They were given a bit more cash than the British ever had during its time as the mercenary country that went across the planet fighting to bring civilization, as they were told. I mean, left with the ordinary folk, left with the dead of all, including the soldiers, the ordinary soldiers that did all the fighting. But the US were given a bit more extra cash themselves, maybe from 1920 to 1960, 70. Then it started going down with the whole economy and the debt, etc., and all the wars. All the wars. But the founding myth again had a modicum of truth for the fact they did definitely have a revolution for independence. But if you read the writings of Franklin, not about them, but by them, and others that signed the Declaration, some of them talk quite candidly of the 30-year period of setting up the system for the revolution, including importing and buying powder and ball and all and armaments and so on from other nations and storing them in secrecy, even in some islands off the US, for all those years. It wasn't a spontaneous thing like it's made out to be. The US already had the people in it. They were part of a big brotherhood. And look at Benjamin Franklin's talks about that himself, The one whose family were the Chandlers, they were candlestick makers, the light bringers. So anyway, if you go into any country, they've got myths, foundation myths and so on. But they were run by, as I say, societies. Everywhere you look, there's societies. And there's no doubt about it. If you pile them on top of each other in the proper order, it's a kind of pyramid type system. There's no doubt about it. And we're living through it. Now, I'll read a little bit, just a little bit, to give you an idea of the mindset of what really runs the world. Because those at the top don't talk about us as though we're human, they don't even talk about us like we're fond pets or anything. We're just things. And they have no problem talking about us as being nothings, basically. Serfs and slaves. And that's a fact. That is a fact. It's rather sad but true the way that we're being so abused and used, and how easy it is to do with using incredible sciences of understanding human nature. But here's a little bit from H.G. Wells' Anticipations. Some of them say it was published in 1902, but I think 1901, I definitely wrote it then. And H.G. Wells was already involved in societies as a front person who would do anything to please the masters. And he did do a lot of things to please the masters. This one's called Anticipations, as I say. And he talks the faith, morals, and public policy of the new republic, like after Plato's republic idea. It's manifested a reconstructed ethical system, reconstructed in the light of modern science, and to meet the needs of such temperaments and characters as the evolution of mechanism will draw together and develop, will give very different values from those given by the existing systems, if they can be called systems, to almost all the great matters of conduct. He's talking about the old systems of religious values and humanity's values and family values and so on. So the scientific priesthood, this new religion, you see, at the time, but completely different values altogether. And he said that to almost all the great matters of conduct, under scientific analysis, the essential facts of life are very clearly shown to be two. There's birth and death. All life is the effort of the things born, driven by fears, guided by instincts and desires to evade death, to evade even the partial death of crippling or cramping or restriction, and to attain to effective procreation, to the victory of another birth. Procreation is the triumph of the living being over the death. And in the case of man, who adds mind to his body, it is not only his child, but in the dissemination of his thought, the expression of his mind and things done and made, that his triumph is to be found. And the ethical system of these men of the new republic, the ethical system which will dominate the world state, will be shaped primarily to favor the procreation of what is fine and efficient and beautiful in humanity, beautiful and strong bodies, clear and powerful minds, and a growing body of knowledge, and to check the procreation of base and servile types, of fear-driven and cowardly souls, of all that is mean and ugly and bestial in the souls, bodies or habits of men. To do the latter is to do the former. The two things are inseparable, and the method that nature has followed hitherto in the shaping of the world, whereby weakness was prevented from propagating weakness, and cowardice and feebleness were saved from the accomplishment of their desires. The method that has only one alternative, the method that must in some cases still be called in to the help of man, is death. The method that must in some cases still be called in to the help of man is death. In the new vision, death is no longer inexplicable horror, no pointless terminal terror to the miseries of life. It is the end of all the pain. That's page 299. He's got the anticipations. So, end of all the pain off life, the end of the bitterness of failure, the merciful obliteration of weak and silly and pointless things. The new ethics will hold life to be a privilege and responsibility, not a sort of night refuge for base spirits out of the void, and the alternative in the right conduct between living fully, beautifully, and efficiently, will be to die for a multitude of contemptible and silly creatures, fear-driven and helpless and useless, unhappy or hateful happy, in the midst of squalid dishonor, feeble, ugly, and inefficient, born of unrestrained lusts, and increasing and multiplying through sheer incontinence and stupidity. The men of the New Republic will have little pity and less benevolence. To make life convenient for the breeding of such people will seem to them not the most virtuous and amiable thing in the world, as it is held to be now, but an exceedingly abominable proceeding. Procreation is an avoidable thing for sane persons, even the most furious passions, and the men of the New Republic will hold that the procreation of children who, by the circumstances of their parentage, must be diseased, bodily or mentally, is talking about with the claim or the unfit. And I do not think it will be difficult for the medical science of the coming time to define such circumstances as absolutely the most loathsome of all conceivable sins. They will hold, I anticipate, that a certain portion of the population, the small minority, for example, afflicted with indisputably and transmissible diseases, with transmissible mental disorders, with such hideous incurable habits of mind as the craving for intoxication exists only on sufferance, out of pity and of patience, and understanding that they do not propagate. And I do not foresee any reason to suppose that they will hesitate to kill when that sufferance is abused. And I imagine also the plea and proof that a grave criminal is also insane will be regarded by them not as a reason for mercy, but as an added reason for death. I do not see how they can think otherwise on the principle they will profess. And they won't be, since these guys too will not be squeamish either in facing or inflicting death, because they will have a fuller sense of the possibilities of life than we possess. They will have an ideal that will make killing worth the while. Like Abraham, they will have the faith to kill, and they will have no superstitions about death. They will naturally regard the modest suicide of incurably melancholy or diseased or helpless persons as a high and courageous act of duty rather than a crime. And since they will regard, as indeed all men raised above a brutish level do regard, a very long term of imprisonment as infinitely worse than death, as being indeed death with a living misery added to its natural terror, they will, I conceive, where the whole terror of man's actions, and not simply some incidental or impulsive action, seems to prove him unfitted for free life in the world, consider him carefully and condemn him and remove him from being. And he goes on and on and on. Now, if you really read the whole thing, you'll find that it isn't just getting rid of what they claim are the ones who are unfit or the bad people either. And don't forget, you can once you get tyrants in power, they keep expanding their levels of who's bad. It's like the French Revolution. They end up slaughtering themselves eventually, layer by layer, until there's nobody left. And that's part of it too. But don't forget, so you can see a lot of stuff. The stuff people will agree to, the criminals and so on, etc., etc., etc. But as I say, think of the rest of it. They're going to kill everybody else they claim is unfit. Or maybe if you got, Aldous Huxley mentioned it too. In an interview with George Wallace, he says, well, supposing people, even just simple things like you're short-sighted and you breed more children who are short-sighted, etc. He was trying to tell you that nature would have you a perfect generation each time by literally not producing the what you would claim would be the inferior types, even in that level. Well, that goes with simple things too, like allergies. We're hearing that now with eugenics. You really want to have a child, you might have this, that, and that, and that, and they might, you see. And you're into eugenics and who should get born, who shouldn't. So all the stuff that Wells basically was talking here, and this is a little bit of it. Okay, he wanted to sterilize pretty well, most of the people that would, even the ones who were doing their base work for them, the really hard base work, the brutes, as he called them, he'd have them sterilized until the next generation, they wouldn't need them, because science would have again progressed even. So you think you're living through something that's just happening step by step by itself today. No, you're not. You're living through an amazing agenda. Sometimes the agenda gives the appearance you're a bit freer, especially when they need you to fight the next war. And as soon as you're fighting it, suddenly your rights are getting taken away from you. If some enemy or enemy that wasn't an enemy before retaliates, and you've got martial law back home, or as I say, a plague is awfully handy, whatever kind it is, and the same thing is happening, isn't it? Terrify the people, terrify them until they can't think anymore. But I would say to people, if you want an idea how they think today, and what you see being taught in the sciences, including medicine, it's good to read Anticipations as an example. And works by Bertrand Russell. Some of the parts you might agree with. In fact, that's how they get you on board. It's like the people they give to you to follow, like talk show hosts and so on. You'd be very, very careful, because the authorized ones out there, even the ones you think are fighting the authorized ones, it's like rat poison. They must give you stuff that other people, real workers, are putting out there. The real investigators. They'll take it all and say it's theirs, and put it out to sound legitimate to the followers. Oh, they're telling us good truth. Yeah, well, they are taking it from here. But the real project, the real motive is that 1%, that last 10% poison. Which is politics, or who you vote for, or what nation to bless, or whatever it happens to be. It's really it's something else we're witnessing today. It's never been so open. Never ever. Yeah. But yeah, you must be given a good part of the truth to take the poison, you see. That's how it's done. And let's see now. So I'll put well, you can look up yourself, Anticipate. It's a good read, actually. It's quite interesting. Especially now that you're locked in and you can't really go anywhere or do very much because of the lockdown, the global lockdown, eh? It's almost global. But just before I get into the talks tonight, really, so please excuse my drifting off into something else. But if you read Anticipations, it gives you an idea of what you're dealing with today. You understand? The same mindsets. And Wells was a big player for putting up massive propaganda through fantastic fiction, by the way, and stacks of non-fiction as well. It was his fiction that gave him the credence and the stardom to do the non-fiction, in fact. And he's quite open about inferior types. And he was into phrenology, measuring skulls and all that in his outlines of history. You'll see that kind of thing. But I'll put this here, and it's by Brandon Turberville, and it's interesting. He's talking about the lockdown. He says 230 years of rights and liberties shredded, and why I oppose the lockdown. It's a good article. And it's, again, everything is food for thought. It doesn't matter if you believe in it or agree with it or not. If you don't look at everything, you won't learn anything. It's bits and pieces from all different aspects of human thought. We actually learn things, and you would understand what's happening right now. 9/11 took so much of the rights away. It had already been decided long before that when they brought in electronics and computers, it would guide you eventually to enslavement, where the authorities would know everything about you in 24 hours a day. They had it all worked out too, how many years to give you on what would seem to be free this and free that, and until everybody thought, expected everything to be free, but they addicted them all. They even knew that pornography, and bringing up one generation, up to these about 20 at least, with easy porn and all the rest of it, would further agenda. They would never toss that computer out the window, or whatever they're using, the tablet, you name it, because they're addicted to it. That was part of it. In the 90s, that's what they made sure everybody knew. It was every paper carried, day after day, month after month. The internet's full of pornography to make sure that everybody would go in and see it, you see. Everything else can get stopped, but then there was no attempt at all to stop pornography. They can stop you, they can cut you off just for saying something or thinking something or even asking questions. That's how tyrannical it is today. But back then, they made sure you had enough little free things and entertainments that once they started to take your rights away from you, you keep using the computer. It's all worked out that way by strategists and behaviorists. So 9/11 took away, and of course, no one. In fact, I can remember the headlines. So many headlines. Are you going to be willing to give up your rights for freedom and safety? Every Western country went into the same act with the same man on the street, asking different passers-by, the man and woman in the street, so would you be able, I suppose we'll have to do it, And you really think what happened then? And never mind the fact there was a whole massive backstory to the whole 9/11 thing, as we all know. I won't even go into it. But it was mainly concentrated on one day's attack in New York City. And the whole world was to change. Understand? The whole world was to change. And in so many ways. And never to get your rights and freedoms back. And Patriot Acts got signed. And the president said to all the people who were supposed to sign it and look at it or debate it, if you don't sign it, you're unpatriotic. What was that? Well, were they going to put you down as a criminal? And George Bush Jr. gave the speech too. He said that you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. There was no option at all. In other words, if you weren't going to go along and you didn't like what the US was planning to go invade other countries, then you would be classed as a terrorist. Incredible, really. The same guy who repeated his father's talk before it happened. If I see a world coming into view, a new world order, 10 years apart from his dad, giving the same speech. And you think it's just developing by itself. So here we are, here's part 2. And just like part 1, so many rights you're never to get back again, you see. You've been told, even after 9/11, and the years following 9/11, they said that get used to it. This war on terror is going to last your whole life and beyond. And it's permanent. It's like the temporary war tax that became the income tax, and the victory tax, etc. And this nuisance thing called rights, an awful nuisance that the CFR journalist published, and I've read the article so many times over many years, when he said that we've got to stop attacking the US Constitution and Bill of Rights. This is head on and debating that, and said just ignore it and go around it and over it and above it, build bridges and go around it, circumvent it by bringing other laws in until you can't see the Constitution, Bill of Rights anymore. That's what he was really referring to. And it's true, most folk go through all this extraneous stuff that's just sort of pasted all over it, and they can't see what's lying underneath, the simplicity of it. So here's, as I say, you're into 9/11 part 2, we might say. Brandon goes into the Constitution and what it meant, etc. And now people are panicking, that's what they're meant to panic, and that's when you just do what you're told and run with the herd, and it's designed that way. Incessant psychic driving too, daily stuff. You're all going to die unless you do what we tell you. Incessant. It's the same as the towers. Every minute in a television station at 9/11 and the days that to follow, you see the same planes going boom, boom, no, down, over and over, psychic driving, boom, 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 which imprints it in the brain, you see. And here you have it today, Here you have it today. And don't forget, the economy was already crashed before it happened. It was crashed because we never recovered from the 2007-8 manufactured planned crash. It was planned because the big bankers, they all pulled out there, and investors pulled out of everything before it happened. So it was planned to go right up to the very end. They're still trying to work out who really owns houses now, because they kept flipping mortgages until hundreds and hundreds of times per mortgage, from banks to banks as well, just flipping and increasing the value, until literally almost mud huts were worth 10 million. That's stretching it a little bit, but not too much. This is supposedly the sane society in which you live, all run by, honest businessmen. I don't know who invented that one, probably the businessman. But anyway, as Brandon talks about how police officers now are often indistinguishable from the military soldiers. And don't forget, there's so many of I remember years ago, when they started bringing the troops back from the different wars, in different years, they would go straight into the police departments. And in fact, they're wooed into the police departments as soon as they come out. And they treat the people on the roads the same way. They pull their guns out on them as though they were Afghanis or whatever, or Iraqis. Same thing. It's intentional. And once these rights go and you allow these things to happen, the terrible things that keep happening, as police do forget what their job really is supposed to be, or it was, then you're in trouble, obviously. So I'll put this one down tonight. Also want to mention too that it's so amazing that Gordon Brown, who was the Prime Minister of Britain at one time, who helped crash the economy there too and wrecked it, another world socialist, who was eventually put over to the US, I think, at the World Bank, I think he went to, which was probably his reward for crashing the economy of Britain, I suppose. And he worked over there. And anyway, he's come out, of course, and he's urged world leaders to create a temporary form of global government to tackle the twin medical and economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is from The Guardian newspaper. And so there you go. So the former Labour Prime Minister, who was at the centre of the international efforts to tackle the impact of the near meltdown on the banks in 2008, said there was a need for a task force involving world leaders, health experts, and the heads of the international organisations that would have executive powers to coordinate the response. A virtual meeting in the G20 group of developing and developed nations or countries, chaired by Saudi Arabia, will be held Thursday, but Brown said it would have been preferable to have included the UN Security Council. He says it's not something that can be dealt with one country. He says there has to be a coordinated global response. It's the first and foremost a medical emergency, and there has to be joint action to deal with that. So there's the emergency part. And once you emergency, then you have your emergency powers, and then you have the United Nations, and then you have a completely different system running the show. I've already made quite plain that I haven't seen the laws of quarantine used as they're supposed to be used. It isn't difficult or rocket science to save a domestic population. It's all understood that the plans have always been in existence, what to do. And the first law is you stop all travel, international travel, into your country. We've watched a farce from January right through to the present time, where international flights from the contaminated countries, the heavily contaminated, still come in. And some of them just take a flight from one country into another country, and they eventually get into the countries they're supposedly not to be allowed into. They get there and do round trips. It's still happening now. What a farce it is, isn't it? And then you bring in, contaminated people, and they ask them to go home. If they go home and just quarantine themselves. They're just starting now inside Canada, I think today or yesterday. or I think actually it's Monday they put it in. I think it started takes effect, where literally interprovincial travel most of it is supposed to be banned except for buses and trains. Well, I guess nobody travels in buses and trains that they're infected. It's just nonsensical, really. So they've made sure, as far as I'm concerned, they've got enough people brought in with the illness to ensure that it's passing on, so they can get all these measures forward, because they could really have nipped in the bud much, much, much earlier. No doubt about it. And you don't wait 2 months before you tell people not to have cruises. Actually 3 months. And put themselves in danger and so on. Anyway, this is the kind of thing that's going on here. So anyway, there's Gordon Brown calling for global government and with basically wartime powers. And again, the experts, the guys who look after the guys that crash banks and like 2007 and 8, have them on board with the top and to run the countries in the world, the guys who really profited from all by causing it, I think. And it says, we need some sort of working executive. If I were doing it again, I would make the G20 a broader organization, because in the current circumstances, you need to listen to the countries that are most affected, the countries that are making a difference, in countries where there's a potential for a massive number of people to be affected, such as those in Africa. And the World Bank and International Monetary Fund needed an increase in their financial firepower. And of course, they're always, it's just astonishing, the hands always out. You've got to turn it, you're to be utter slaves that can live in utter austerity and live on a handful of rice, etc., to make it all work, right? All for the good, we're all in it together, eh? All for the greater good. So the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the two big organizations, along with the Bank for International Settlements, these private organizations, private banks, folks, they're private. They were set up by the world controllers that for all for international affairs. They set this up, including the UN. Eh? You don't vote for these guys. Eh? They meet in secret and all that. So they want an increase in their financial firepower off us, you see, the people, again, the taxpayer, to cope with the impact of the crisis on low and middle income countries, he said. To be honest with you, the money I live on is probably below the poverty line today. I don't ask for any help of authorities. And what they were giving out, in fact, to some of the people in some of the countries, I'm way below them, what they get. That's what I bring in, and live on. So here he is saying, they want to tax me and other people, to give to the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund so they can cope with the impact of the crisis on low and middle income countries. I hope he's talking about me in Canada. I doubt it. You see what I'm saying? Corruption, we live in corruption. We're overarched by corruption. It's all around you. It's but the top is top heavy with it. And all wear business suits and have fancy titles of their organizations and so on. And they'll justify millions of dollars for their incomes quite easily. For the big mansions and to pay for their central heating through their mansions and so on, as to tell you've got to pay taxes for climate change and so on and all that carbon. This is the same bunch, eh? They want to sit on a board and tell you how to live under the pretense they want to help Africans. As we're going through this too, and I was thinking going back again, but I won't go back at the moment, to H.G. Wells' Anticipations, he does mention the people who live on opiates and so on. As, of course, Aldous Huxley mentioned too, with this Soma, the people would all be on Soma, a drug that would have little side effects, like long-lasting side effects, but it could put you in a wonderful, euphoric, happy, contented, non-anxious state, you see. And as we're going through this, isn't it amazing? Because when you look at the authorizations of the ruling ones above, the behaviorists above us, they have all these psychologists and behavioral think tanks working for governments right now. And every country is getting the same propaganda dished out at the same time. Exact same stuff with the ads and so on. Here's one here, talking about, they call it packets, I guess they call it packets or something. Food and beverage operations would include package stores, it says. And they fall in as essential to what we need. So the stores that must stay open, you see, through all this. Businesses and stores across Massachusetts, it's happening everywhere though, going dark and remote if they haven't done so already, under the new emergency orders issued by the governor and so on. And it says here that non-essential services are closing down for 2 weeks. It could be more longer than that. But there's places that shoppers can still expect to be, for a bargain or two, package stores are called. Yes, liquor stores are considered essential businesses in the Commonwealth, right there amongst the select places. It's the same across Canada, Britain, everywhere else. Plenty of booze as you get locked in, right? And I really mean it. I've got so many articles, and I won't even touch them, because it's like long lectures on them. But on the behaviorists that are working on all of this right now and how to manage our psyche. Right? And I really mean that. Billions actually of dollars have gone into all this thing across the world just to manage our psyches. So if you get lots of booze, and you can't get food because it's cleaned out with folk panicking, but there's stacks of booze, right? And so it's an essential service that they can get their booze. And here in Ontario, of course, the government runs the booze industry. And you have to get their booze from liquor stores and beer stores that are run by the liquor licenses authorities. They're all government employees, basically, that work there. So the government gives us our drugs here, and they give us a lot of the dope too here. It's all legal, you see. So anyway, and here's the thing too, it isn't just booze, right? So his Governor Baker says the decision is driven by federal policy as much as anything else. Moments after announcing the emergency order Monday, he was asked about how places like package stores and marijuana dispensaries would be affected by the new regulations. Food and beverage operations, which would include package stores, fall as essential, and that's driven by federal policy as much as anything else. So basically the booze and the drugstores, the real drugstores, are continuing to make sure you're kept, because people are freaking out, you see. They're tuning in every day. I gave talks a long time ago about horror stories and how they work. Now, everybody likes horror stories, a lot of scare here and there. We all like them. And there's so much to watch, you see. And even the really, really bad ones, you'll still watch them generally if you're not too tired. And the reason you keep watching intently, even in the most terrible horror story, is you project yourself into the stories. We do it in all kinds of stories, you see. Because it affects the limbic system, the primitive part, this basic, animal survival. And if you look away and miss a part of it for a brief moment of what the hero or the guy that you're identifying with in it is, you might die because you don't know. You see, so your mind attunes you. Keep in a real life situation. If a monster was coming at you or was looking around watching you, you wouldn't take your eyes off it. You see, to survive. Same thing watching a horror movie. Well, that's what all your hype on the television and the internet is right now. Same thing, and you're terrified, and they're making sure you're terrified. And you keep tuning in to make sure, and all they do, they keep demanding of you is the same things, Don't go out. Well, how are you going to get the food in if you don't go out? Especially the folk who are supposedly more susceptible to it, or the bad effects of it. It's the wrong age group sort of thing, as they say, or certain disabilities, and making them more prone to it. Well, they've got no option but to go out. I'll have to go into Sudbury myself. I was in the hospital, remember, I was croaked in 2016 with something similar. And they kicked me out of the hospital. I had to get the drugs myself to cure myself. Not kidding you, that happened. So I have to get into town and try to find, and hope they haven't cleaned out another supermarket. And no one is going to, the government says stay at home. Well, what, you're supposed to starve to death to stay at home and starve? Is that the idea? Then they use UPS, I think it is, or purely a courier that takes the orders from, I think, the big stores that are delivering food and so on to something like Amazon. They don't deliver here. They won't deliver in my little place in the stair. They'll take the money for it from the guys that whoever purchases stuff. But if someone's wanting to send me a few cans, they won't do it. They want me to go into Sudbury to get it. That's, let's say, a 40-mile round trip. So you got a courier company in Canada that wants the customer to pick up the stuff rather than them deliver it. Okay. And I've done that before, of course, over the years, that kind of thing, that same company. So yeah, you got to go into town and risk it. I'm sure Mr. Trudeau doesn't drive into some supermarket and put himself and other folk at risk. Another article I'll put up tonight too, I've got to do before I forget, is about the farces of all the. Do you realise the campaign to show you a celebrity is getting this? That's all you get is terror, fear, and celebrities getting it. And I'm a bit suspicious of them personally, because it's right up the path, basically the beaten path of the marketers, and how they convince you that we're all susceptible and they're human, and we all follow the people all follow the celebrities. Makes it more real to them. You see, if it's Joe Blow getting it, you wouldn't care, but a celebrity. I'm very suspicious of them. I really am. I really am. And by the way, they certainly have incredible treatments for those at the top. They really do. They really, really do. You know, China is already taking the actual antibodies from survivors in China who are donating blood, and it's really immunoglobulin, basically, and you inject it into people with it who are, and they're fine right away. Kills it off right away. I remember the Africans did that to deal with Ebola years ago. I did a show on it too, because the UN went in with the WHO, World Health Organization, and these doctors went in, were furious that when the African doctor says, we've had enough here. We can take the blood from survivors, and you withdraw the antibodies from it and inject it. And something like about 20 patients that they did it with in a village. All of them except 2 survived. We were getting this injected into. They were all terminally ill at the time, going under fast. And the 2 that didn't survive, when it was too late, the organs were already in total failure and necrosis right now. So the African doctors knew what to do, and it was awfully successful. They've always known how to do this. So believe you me, don't think that any world leader is going to get it bad here. Unless he's not part of the club and they want rid of them. There's all kinds of treatments they have for them at the top there. But we won't see them at the bottom. I also want to put up some articles to do with, which I talked about too some years back. I saw it coming when I got the whiff from the World Health Organization, using other organizations too, like the vegans and so on. Stop eating animals and stop pumping them full of antibiotics, and then of course all the health, the ones who are really, and there's a lot of people who are really overboard with the health thing. They really go for it all. If it's in a health magazine, Natural Health, they'll just go overboard without thinking. The antibiotics are not in the animals when they go for slaughter. It's a law. They stop giving about a month beforehand. Antibiotics in you or an animal won't last longer than 24 hours in your system. And if something was put in the system, by the time it's cooked, it's not an antibiotic anymore at all, honestly. Folk forget that. There's all kinds of ways to get you to stop eating meat. And, of course, that's one of them. But the World Health Organization put a big push on too. And you have to understand the World Health Organization and what's across the hallway there too. At the United Nations, you also get the United Nations have a department, it used to be called Department of Population Control, and it was actually put up there and funded. It was set up by the Rockefellers years ago, and so it was put through their fund. But the whole point of it was actually population control. Then they just dropped the control part when the folk realised what it was. Still there. And so the World Health Organization, quite a few years ago, and then really stepping it up in 2015-16, you saw these articles appear, and across the board at the same time, doctors perhaps shouldn't be prescribing so many antibiotics. This is part of a campaign. You see, the general public must read this stuff and say, oh, I see, okay, without realizing there's a campaign you're reading to get you to stop asking or expecting to get treated with antibiotics. And they put memos out to the doctors, encourage them to reduce their prescriptions and antibiotics and so on. Eh? Well, guess what happens when you reduce your prescriptions of antibiotics? The folk who need them can't get them, and folk die. And I've already read last week the articles and put the links up to them in Canada. We've got to start thinking about now who we can treat and who it won't treat before it gets worse, you see, before it hits really badly. Eugenics and bioethics are all into play right now. And they've decided before you even get brought in, if they're going to even bother just palliative care till you die, depends on who you are, what age you are, pre-existing condition, written off. And believe you me, the doctors these days are like robots. Most of them can't think for themselves. They go along with these agendas. It's like idiocracy, and they've got their little tablets out and their phone, and they point to things that are wrong. A little pain here, flow charts. And if they're taught, to stop prescribing that and expect folk to die, so you have to accept that as part of the work. And so, well, when they're in the hospitals, it's all admitted to. Even when they're pushing the different forms of quinine right now, along with azithromycin, which is an antibiotic. How many folk are getting an antibiotic? Have you worked that out, huh? You can, if you really dig into it, and if you're good at investigations, find out that, like places in BC, there's certain reasons why they've even had 90-year-olds come out from critical care. There's good reasons for it, and some of them are political, by the way. Because it's not good for folk to die. They're in specific categories in this day and age. And so they give them all the treatments they can to pull them through as best they can, which they won't give to the rest of the population, probably. There's awful. It's so terrible today with political correctness. You can't. You couldn't save yourself now if you had to, by just knowing facts that might help everybody. That's how bad things are now. But I know that some countries, for instance, are going overboard with everything they've got to bring certain ethnic groups through, because they don't want what they classify as ethnic foreigners dying on their soil. It looks bad on the governments and so on. And everything's so incredibly tender, isn't it? Talking is tender. So much so you can't describe anything if your life depended on by knowing it to save yourself or saving others. It's that bad. I think it's going to get worse. So other countries are at this too, and so yeah. As I said last week, if you are a certain age and you have any problems at all, and you might end up in there, make sure you have an advocate that will fight tooth and nail when they try to deny you certain treatments, which should be standard for everybody. I really mean that. Now, also put up another article to do with the last one. 6 states declared marijuana dispensaries essential businesses, exempting them from lockdown. So there's more and more and more of them. In Canada, it's even better, you see. Because Canada, everybody at the top in the government, and so they sunk their money, investments into the big corporations in Canada. And the companies, right when this was happening actually, already have their hands out for about $1.5 million or maybe $1 billion, I'm not sure what it is, of bailouts, because they were in such bad trouble, because they'd overestimated what the folk would, they thought folk would start living on the stuff, I guess. Maybe stuffing their mattresses with the stuff. I don't know what they imagined, but it was going to be heaven for all the people who invested, and the bottom's been falling out of it, apparently. Big trouble. So when this came along, the outcome in the hands, please give us money and save us, and you need us. This is the Soma time, you see. So there you go. By the way, as they're doing all that with the booze and drugs until you all stay at home, right? And it's bad enough as going neurotic watching TV and be afraid, be very, very afraid, and keep bringing the same experts on, telling you the same things. And by the way, before I forget too, I just tuned in to Canadian radio today, on CBC I think it was, or one of the stations, and they're talking about British Columbia. And they've actually got a big fan base now for the woman who comes on, the doctor out there, who gives these little quips. I don't know if she writes them herself or they're written for by the marketing companies and so on, because everybody reads scripts these days. But she's just a PR person, a spokesperson for the people, and they've given her star status, and they've got a big fan club for her now, and rah-rah clubs. This is all manufactured, isn't it? Like a wartime scenario. So these are the new heroes, you see, and big fan clubs for them. And they tell you, keep 2 meters apart. This is what they get. This is what you go to university for and get, big money when you come out. And wash your hands. Okay. And don't come out your houses. As I say, there's always a dead silence. But how would they going to get food, etc.? How is it? Never any. They don't say that. These stars don't tell you how to manage that way, especially if there's no income. A lot of people. Yeah. But let's have fan bases for them and make them into star status, and you create an image for them. You see, the star machinery is all in operation. It really is, folks. That's how things actually happen and how they work. Another article, too, is called A Brady Bond Solution for America's Economic Crisis and Unpayable Corporate Debt. And it goes into even before the COVID-19 crisis had slashed stock prices in half. Since it erupted in January, financial markets were in an inherently unstable condition. Years of quantitative easing after the 2007 and 8 crash had loaded so much money into stock and bond prices that stock price earnings and multiples and bond prices were far too high by any normal and reasonable historical standards. And the risk premiums disappeared, with only a few basis points separating the US Treasury bills and corporate bonds. So it goes into what's happening in the financial realm, and so on and so on. And it's true enough, this was time for this big thing to happen, and it's some will say it's a godsend, I suppose, or depends what, or maybe it's sent by a demon, who knows. Nearly half of Canadians say they can't afford to miss work as coronavirus cases escalate. But don't worry, you've got doctors now that are made into stars, Wash your hands 6 feet apart. Cough up your sleeves. Stay in your homes. Okay. But you can say it with a little joke here and there. As I say, who writes it for, I don't know. Yep, I tell you. And the folk never figure it out. Everyone's getting staged and managed like that. And in wartime scenarios, that's what they're doing. I remember looking at the British ones too. I kept wondering who these characters were that they were giving, like George Formby and so on. And he was saying the little, with a working class accent. He was no working class guy, but he was singing about leaving your bubble gum when you're leaving your bubble gum out or your toothpaste overnight. Something I can't remember what it was. Silly little ditty songs that H.G. Wells even talked about long before Formby came along. But they made him a star too, a wartime star. You see, they do all these kind of things always. Literally, like they made Churchill a star as well. That's what it was. I liked actually. As I mentioned before, Spike Milligan. Spike Milligan was he was bipolar, a comedian, and not everybody's cup of tea, the type of humour and so on. But he did mention that, and he was in World War II, I think an artillery unit, like a mobile artillery unit, and he did mention about cracking up on them when they're getting shelled one day, and he just clawed himself into the ground basically. But he does mention when Chamberlain came back with his little paper about his treaty with Germany and how they're all happy and so on and happy until eventually the war was declared, and he says he heard on the news and the Prime Minister came on and says, "We are now at war with Germany." And as he says, what struck him was the "we" part, because he had nothing to do with it. And that's really the way you have to look at things in all reality. You have nothing to do with it. It's also staged, isn't it? We are now. But here we go through all this thing, the same kind of thing too. We're all in it together for the greater good, though. So Canadians can't afford to miss work, etc. You got so much disinformation, along with the information is just astonishing. You still can't get actual figures on anything, the way things are written and put across with the wonderful Malthusian graphs. Malthus was the first guy to start graphs, you see, to terrify the public about what would happen if this continued, if people kept breeding, and you'd all be walking each other's heads, over your heads each other. But it never happened, of course. And of course, it would all die of starvation. It never happened either. But facts don't matter when it comes to terrifying the public, to get them to be compliant and to do what they're told. Last week I mentioned too, I said, isn't it odd that even in Sudbury they said there's no community spread? But they just knew that the following week it was going to be massive. And I said, well, they're going to either bring it in or else release something. How else could you do that? Well, see, they've got the snowbirds. Snowbirds are retirees that go down for the winters, and mainly to Florida and other places in the States too, but mainly to Florida, and then they come back up in March. Well, bingo, without really mentioning too much about it to the people, they start not talking about new cases, and you dig into the case and you find out they came back from mainly Florida. Snowbirds, some of them drove up, and they're supposed to go straight to their homes in quarantine, and there's an article, they said no, they're not going to do it and comply, etc. So that's what they said, is to try to make you dislike them. It's not their fault. But the fact is, some of them definitely were contaminated, and of course they haven't been screening anybody all along in Canada, either coming in through aircraft or any other ways. And so they got cases for sure. One woman was on a plane, she got a plane from Florida, I guess to, I don't know, it was Toronto or somewhere, and they got a flight from Toronto to another place inside Canada. And so they had to, when she came down sick, eventually, they had to trace, this is the comical bit to me, they said they're looking for the passengers on both flights that she was on, from I think four seats down, so all the passengers for 4 seats on the way from either direction, front and back, that they had to. I guess the virus knows not to go any further than 4 seats. I guess that's how it works. It's amazing how scientists just know these things, isn't it? And you get bureaucrats who just come up with the rules. Well, that's it, 4 seats. Everybody else won't bother checking anybody else. Or did maybe this person go to the bathroom a few times and touch the seats as she went along? Or let's not think about that. Let's not look on the dark side of things, for goodness sake. It's too unpleasant. And no one likes to look at unpleasant things like that. So just like 4 seats down back. So they had to trace those folk and then put them in quarantine too. But there's more and more of them actually. There's thousands come up across Canada, and a lot went to Quebec, but even that, it's quite amazing, because you know they've got all the scientists working in the social programs working together with this agenda too, don't you? And they already had the Facebook on board and this other social programs, Twitter and so on. Even in the exercise they had with Bill Gates and Johns Hopkins University, they already admitted they already had them even for the exercise on board for a thing before it happened, which is pure luck, of course. But there's articles, I'll put them up, where they're using your phone apps, they'll stash your phone apps, and they're tracking you everywhere you go. Not just who you meet and your cluster of friends, and they are tracking your clusters of friends too. To say, because if one of them's infected or possibly even got a little bit of a fever or a headache or whatever, they want to then study all of you, and they'll keep tracking you and listen to your calls and so on through the different echelon programs that they have. They're triggered by certain words like, I've got a headache, I've got a fever, yada yada yada, and then of course your cluster of friends and where you travel are all watched and monitored. I should say you're monitored. Eventually they might come and get you after giving you a warning to stay put at home rather than quarantine yourself if you think you're sick. And this is all, again, in the newspapers as they get ramped up for it. Of course, I'm sure they had this all planned long before that this thing broke out, as they say. I should really mention, too, that before I get off the topic, remember, I never planned my talks, but I was thinking of The Last Enemy, that TV series that Britain did. It was about 2 or 3 parts, perhaps, but it was really well done. And it was 2008. They showed you the high-tech machinery. It was actually designed. They actually said that when they did the series, that the author had looked at all the different technology which was in use then, and the stuff that was on the table to come into use, and put it into the series where everybody in Britain was monitored way beyond anything you can imagine, and internet speed for the government agencies was just incredible, speed beyond anything that the average person's getting at home. And of course they had all the data on every single person in real time as they monitored everyone, followed you in speech, the whole thing. And it was called The Last Enemy, because the enemy was the people's rights and freedoms. And it was to do with, guess what? It was to do with massive migration coming in illegally, and a secret plan that was hatched by the government and their version of Homeland Security, you might say, to use science and vaccines, free vaccines, to help the people in all the countries that had their cities not bombed into the Stone Age. And then they would track them with tracers coming into the country, because these things would give off traces, basically, as you're going through different checkpoints and you go through subways. Everything's got little cashless things there that register you going through with your ID and everything else. But on top of the plot, the scientists that they hired actually put something else in the vaccine. It was a disease, ethnic-specific disease, meant to hit mainly just them. The ones that got it, you couldn't catch it from them. Maybe if you had a transfusion from them or something, but it would kill the person who had the vaccination itself, just for them. That's what it was based upon. And hit teams going out to try to kill off anybody who was uncovering the big plot, you see. So the government agencies there's been 2 or 3 government agencies all kind of competing with each other to clean it all up. It was quite well done, but it showed you the technologies that were in use then, and the arguments that were put forth, and the fact about why they should monitor the public, etc. They also had what they called, and it is true, they do have this, by the way, you find this in your emergency plans that be unrolled everywhere in every country. If you have an ability to talk to people and communicate to them, and you're not putting the right stuff, the authorized stuff across to them in times of war, they grab you and imprison you. They'll warn you and close you down, fine you as well, they said they would do, but they could imprison you, or maybe even worse. This is wartime scenario. In The Last Enemy, if you don't go along with everything, you're called an UNAS, which is an unaffiliated subversive. I mentioned this years ago too. But unaffiliated subversive, it means you're not necessarily affiliated with any terrorist organization, but you're subversive individually because you don't comply with authority and go along with it, you see. So you'll get lifted, at the very least. I'd also like to mention that Gates' Universal Vaccine Agenda, ID 2020, is all there too. 2020 is not just ID, it's an ID with your vaccinations. And as I say, getting back to what I talked about in the late 1990s, was eventually you would need this thing as you walked into anywhere, and even to get food. And if you didn't have your vaccines up to date and so on, this is in Bill Gates. This is the kind of things from Bill Gates' ID 2020. I'll put the links up, you read it from his own site, his own statements and so on. That really, you'd be a threat to others, you see, because you're a threat. So alarms will go off eventually, you see. They've already done the testing in some volunteers with this kind of thing. And of course, and eventually it's to go all the way into not just your ID, but it'll be your debit card, in your skin and all the rest of it. It's unlimited what you can put in a chip these days. And also tattoos. They can use tattoos. A few years back, they showed you some of these tattoos. They could actually make them trendy on your skin, but they're actually a circuit type of thing, an integrated circuit. And they can make them really, I guess, enough TV shows and so on with heroes and heroines, then they can make it trendy, sexy, and folk would want it. Also, and that's the tattoo delivery chip is called. Another thing too, they always give you these slogans, like the James Bond, he would always give you, the tyrants were generally incredibly rich billionaires, individual billionaires, but they belonged to these same organizations, Spectre and so on. And some of them were even taking over the world's water supply under the guise of preservation and saving the world and having big philanthropic investment companies on the go. And in reality, they would start to ration the water, and it would cost a fortune. It would be more expensive than gold, you see, which is happening in different parts of the world. And of course, to hype up the drought, drought like never before, is to make sure they've drained places that you normally get water from. That's how it really works, though, you see. When I think of Event 201, I do think of James Bond, believe it or not. Whenever I see the big, obviously appointed by a very much higher power, you might say, to rule over us, or manage us, basically, been benevolent, philanthropists and all that kind of thing, I can't help but think of the characters in the Bond movies, because often the bad guys were the great, philanthropists, and they were doing wonderful things to change the world, and big money was getting spent in technology, generally in sciences and so on. But when I really see Bill Gates, I can't listen to him when he's waving his hands a lot. That's all he does, is too much hand flapping and arm flapping, which I distrust in people, because they get taught that in the motivational courses, and they're taught, they think that convinces people and distracts them, or really detracts from what they're saying. It absorbs you in the actions as opposed to the content. And at the end of say a business meeting, for instance, you'll say, oh yeah, okay, without thinking, because you forget everything else I've said, because all this magician sort of waving in front of your face. I can't really stand it. And it is a taught thing, But Bill Gates really is a lucky guy, as I say, very lucky. He just happens to get into the right things at the right time, and things take off at the right time, and and then he goes around the world to help the world. But he reminds me, as I say, when I think of that event, that he went to 201 and helped manage, I think of the character in the James Bond movie, believe it or not. That's how my mind works, I guess. And it's Tomorrow Never Dies. Yeah, it was Tomorrow Never Dies, it's called. And the main character and the villain in it was a wonderful man who was worshipped by everybody because he made sure through publicity campaigns and marketing and massive publicity, they made him a star, so you would worship him. That's how it was done. And so the character, he owns massive news organizations across the world, video and newspapers and everything else. And he literally made the news in advance. That was the part of the trick, you see, because he would manipulate events in the world to make things happen. And, of course, Bond comes along and catches on to the game and disrupts the outcome of the news, which really upsets him since he's already got it all written how it's supposed to work out. But that was his big headline, too, in the movie, Tomorrow Never Dies, was tomorrow's news today. And that's really what Bill Gates makes me think of with these meetings, because he just seems to, I guess he must read tea leaves a lot. You know, he must get the old-fashioned tea, the proper stuff. And you're left with these tea leaves, and you bring somebody in who will stare at them for ages and then tell you what it means. They can see things in it, you see. Things that are going to happen. If he did the same thing, you know, he doesn't need to bet on horses, but if he did, I'm sure he'd be a real winner with that too. Interesting, the Red Cross is requesting blood, but they're not doing testing for the COVID. Isn't that rather odd? They were asked this, you know, in interviews. No, we didn't currently to do any special testing. I was wondering too if it's for the actual antibodies from folk who've recovered. They won't tell you that, but I'm just wondering. It's for the wealthier people, I'd imagine. Also want to mention the Ray Bradbury Theatre. Ray Bradbury was an awfully good sci-fi fantasy writer. A lot of his stuff got used and put into movies as well, just like Philip K. Dick. And Bradbury put out one called The Pedestrian in 1989, a short, maybe 29, 30-minute thing, show of a future where everyone is locked down. And they've been brought up, their lives in lockdown. They can't remember when they were free. So they're raised in apartment buildings and so on, each one in your own apartment. And they didn't have the computer there then, but you had a TV on 24 hours a day with God knows so many stations. And people would just sit individually in their little box and stare at the thing. I guess food must have got delivered somehow. I don't know how it was done. But no one went outside. It was a permanent curfew. And so one guy that used to phone him all the time would come down and he'd try to get him out. This was a particular guy, try to take him out with him for a walk at night. And the guy was always terrified. We can't do that, you know. And all the excuses not to. And eventually goes out with them, and they couldn't believe it. They're looking at the moon. And he couldn't remember ever seeing the moon and so on, and nature and all that. And eventually a kind of robotic helicopter comes along and questions them and says, "Why are you out?" And the guy says, "Well, to get some exercise and something to do." And the guy said, "Haven't you got a television?" He said, "Yeah, it's broken." But eventually he takes one of them away with him. Well, there's nobody in the helicopter. It's robotic. And he's walking into it. He's been ordered to walk into the helicopter that opens his front door. And he says, there's nobody in it. He says, I wonder how long these things have been operating without any humans at all. Maybe there are no humans left to manage all this whole system. And machines were just going on as usual and threatening people and taking them away if they were literally a kind of a subversive again, with a kind of old think mentality. You know what I'm saying? They had a term for it in the thing, but it was interesting, just the concept of permanent lockdown, and until you take it all for granted, it's normal, and you're supposed to stay in your room, and the whole idea of it all falls into place at the same time. These kind of shows, along of course with the eugenics program and Soylent Green, and also you had Logan's Run. It was a big hit too, where you hit a certain age and a little chip in your hand went off and you were carouseled away into oblivion, meaning you were destroyed, but they thought that you were going up to a kind of heaven for the general public, eugenics. And of course the same thing that, again, H.G. Wells and his pal George Bernard Shaw and a few others, and his mentor through all, because the one who financed the Fabian Society was the Astor family, Lord Astor. And of course they thought too, but the useless eaters and just doing away with them too, the useless people at the bottom. That's all there really, isn't it? People like to have winners all the time, but they follow what they think are the winners. And that goes for authors down through history that predicted certain things, and how they even put some of the predictions in novel form. And we have, of course, those who for the last while have been on about, Aldous Huxley, with his Brave New World, really put it across much better, as opposed to, old-fashioned Orwell that saw things, the big boot stamping on the human face forever, and an authoritarian managed society, a curfewed society, and all the rest of it, with rationing and all that, you see. And how crazy, because, and I said years ago, they'll use both systems together. And here we are. You've got massive psychological warfare going on with monitoring of us all incredibly minutely right now. Billions getting tossed across the globe for all the snoops on the internet as they manage us and watch us and so on. But at the same time, yet you have martial law techniques getting put in with millions of troops in some places to ensure folks stay in their homes at night and that kind of thing. Very Orwellian. And when you think about 1984, Orwell had it quite right too, because in wartime, and he went through it in wartime, he was a propagandist for the BBC. In fact, he worked there, and he understood it. And he said in 1984, they had these propaganda spiels every day, where they come out and say that we have made so many tanks and so many rifles and so many bombs, and for our boys at the Malabar front. And today we get the heads of countries coming out and saying, we've made so many million face masks and so many gowns and so many gloves and for our people at the National Health Service front. It's the same stuff we're hearing. It really is, isn't it? And the same techniques are being used. So it's kind of interesting to put the two together. But yeah, both systems, the Brave New World system and at the present, the Orwellian system, to speed up a little bit, are being both used at the same time. Anyway, we're living in an amazing system that really, to watch this unfurl in a complete war strategy with the same kind of propaganda, and even celebrities. Also, the only folk that seem to be sick are celebrities, we're supposed to believe, eh? And are they really? This is part of to me, it's two-staged, that part of it. I've no doubt about that. Celebrities really love them. They don't like getting sick. They like their lives. They enjoy it because they're so wealthy and everything's taken care of for them. Now, Michael McCaffrey is a journalist who he writes from Hollywood, basically, where he works, and he's got a good page basically on the celebrities, and he calls it the celebra virus, because you get inundated with these ridiculous, inane verbiage interviews with who's doing well, who's not doing well as a celebrity, and of course, for some reason, they're all getting into the news as having supposedly the quarantine for the virus. Poor souls. But this particular journalist says coronavirus is a terrible malady that is killing people and the global economy, but it isn't the most pernicious pandemic afflicting the globe right now. It isn't, no. It says the most diabolical disease currently in circulation is the dreaded celebra virus. The onset of the celebra virus starts with a steady stream of verbal diarrhea gushing forth from empty-headed, self-absorbed, attention-starved celebrities, which is quickly followed by a convulsive, a few more different things, and rage headaches from the rest of us. Then he goes into the people you've seen recently, celebrities with all their thoughts, as they suffer because they can't mix with people and nonsense like that. That's just completely made up verbiage, as I say. But it's a good article, gives you a little chuckle, and it's worthwhile reading. And we certainly need a chuckle during this debacle we're going through right now. So I'll put the links up for that. Let's get on with some of the other things here before I run out of time here. Remember, too, I could maybe split this into two parts, or just put it all in one go. I'm not sure yet. You'll see at the end of the talk. Remember too, folks, you can help me out by going to cuttingthroughthematrix.com website. You can always get the whole talk there for sure, and list my other sites which are listed on the cuttingthroughthematrix.com website. In case this one goes down for any reason, you've got the other ones listed there which will be working hopefully. And you can find out too how to send some cash to my way as well, so that I can tick along here hopefully. Because as I say, I live in I live at a level most folk can't fathom at all. I really mean that too. And so anyway, coronavirus, more than 1 million people fled Paris. I talked about the snowbirds coming to Canada again from the States, and Florida's a heavily infected area right now. So more than 1 million people fled Paris as lockdown began, the phone data suggests. So there's actually phone data organizations there that show you. We're all getting monitored. If you have a cell phone, you're getting monitored. I don't have a cell phone, but most folk have cell phones, and you get monitored all the time, your movements. And when you suddenly vanish from an area, they've tracked you already to where you ended up. Very, very precisely too. Quite a few organizations are doing this. So I'll put this one up. One company is called, one phone company called Orange said it analyzed location data, charted the mass exodus from the capital as the country prepared to restrict movement to tackle the virus. So nearly 1.2 million between the 13th and 20th of March vamoosed out the country. A lot of them came to Canada too. Quebec now is just rising with numbers infected people too. So that was a good area for them to flood to. Some of them may flood to. Goodness, I don't know how many, but it's French speaking, you see, and so it's a kind of home from home in a sense, where they feel more at ease naturally. But unfortunately, it's now going up higher and higher in Quebec now. Cause and effect, eh? And the same thing happened, remember, with Wuhan, where 5 million people, I think, vamoosed out the country very quickly and went to different areas too. A lot of them came to the west coast of Canada. Lots of relatives all over the world, you know. And you can't blame folk for being petrified and trying to get out. But regardless, though, there was no real attempt to stop anybody coming in from these to the countries to save your domestic populations. The first law is always save the healthy population first, because once it gets sick, everything you're fighting for is lost, isn't it? If it really goes bad. So strange new types of quarantines. The only people getting quarantined are the general population, who are all told to stay home. And scientists whose doomsday pandemic model predicted Armageddon just walked back the apocalyptic predictions. Neil Ferguson, he was a biggie there, a professor who ignited the world's drastic response to the novel Wuhan coronavirus when he published the Bombshell report, and the link is there too, predicting 2.2 million Americans and more than 500,000 Brits would be killed. This was be very, very afraid scenario that the US and Britain parroted, you see. After both the US and the UK government, it's all done by computer. I think they're using the same computers where they predict the weather, you know, and the climate change. It says, after both the US and the UK governments effectively shut down their citizens and economies, Ferguson is now walking back his doomsday scenarios. So his report from the Imperial College, which White House and other officials took seriously, said that if the US and UK did not shut down for 18 months and isolation measures were not taken, we would expect a peak in mortality, daily deaths to occur after approximately 3 months, he says. His model showed overflowing hospitals and ICU beds. For an uncontrolled epidemic, we predict critical care bed capacity would be exceeded as early as the second week in April, with an eventual peak in ICU or critical care bed demand that is over 30 times greater than maximum supply in both countries, he says. But now he's gone back on his predictions to an extent. I guess he's maybe put an update to his computer program in it. But it says, after tens of thousands of restaurants, bars and businesses closed, Ferguson is now retracting his modelling, saying he feels reasonably confident our healthcare system can cope when the predicted peak of the epidemic arrives in a few weeks. So he testified with the UK's Parliament Select Committee on Science and Technology Wednesday and said he now predicts UK deaths from the disease will not exceed 20,000 and could be much lower. Also, too, here's the kind of thing that confuses you. I don't think you realize that most folk, now they're getting put down by phone and so on, as having the virus, have never been tested and won't get tested. You can play the numbers game too. And lots of folk are playing the numbers game on all sides and for all different reasons, and a lot of science organizations too. And the statisticians, of course, that's what their job is to use statistics for agendas. But anyway, the Ontario Provincial Police says that the first uniformed member that they've got going ill with it, I guess is what they're trying to say. It's badly written, everything's so badly written. First uniformed member, which make folk think, well, don't have uniforms for the rest, the way it's written, right? Anyway, he's tested presumptive positive, so a presumptive positive for COVID. Before, they could only use positive after the testing, but now it's presumed positive. So it's a presumption, or is it, you don't know, see? And lots of stuff is written this way too. It just terrifies the people, doesn't it? Also, when you see the different levels of folk who supposedly got it, and you'll say, my God, that's 100 for every 1,000 is dying or something. So for every 1,000 that's got it, 100 is dying. But no, don't forget that the ones who either have phoned in or the folk who've been tested are not the whole population that's got it. For every person who supposedly got it and tested, there are thousands that have probably got it and don't even know it. So then the death rate doesn't look anywhere near per 1,000, as it would seem to be if it's only the ones who are tested, and then so many die. You see, everyone who's tested, there's thousands who are not tested. That's what I'm saying. That goes up and up and up with the overall numbers. I'll put these links up for those that want to peruse what I'm talking about here. An interesting article too was about in Italy. And you hear all the different reasons why Italians are. By the way, I was going through a lot of documentation and old books, by the way, that were written after the so-called Spanish flu of 1917-18. And it had listed, one of them had listed, did pretty good listings that were written, books written about 1925, of the different, they had so many people fighting in Europe, you see, all different nationalities. And they found that, again, people who were Chinese, but the ones that got to China areas or Far East, they got hit very, very hard with it. But interestingly enough, Italians were fighting in the trenches too. And they were also fighting in their own country against the so-called Axis powers or whatever they call themselves. But wasn't Axis before World War II, mind you. But anyway, they were fighting World War I, and they were coming down with it pretty bad too in Italy. And much more higher numbers than the other peoples. At the time, some of the authors, and even afterwards in universities, tried to figure out, thought maybe it was due to bad diets and malnutrition and some kind of poverty. But they were no poorer than the Irish and the Scots at that time. And they weren't coming down with the same kind of numbers. So it was thought there was even queried then there's something different. And of course we know today there's different receptors and more receptors for this type of thing in certain people's lungs than others, certain ethnic groups. And also they found that the people from the area that eventually was called Iran also were higher in it too. Higher mortality rate, right? And they caught it more easily too. So it's interesting that there's something definitely with these COVID viruses, if that's what it was the first time too. And that's just by the way, as I say, but there you go. In the area of Italy, where it really broke out and spread, and this is from the New Yorker in 2018, the Chinese workers who assembled designer bags in Tuscany. This is an interesting little article. And it said that the first significant wave of Chinese immigrants arrived in the industrial zone around Prato, a city 15 miles northwest of Florence in the 1990s. Nearly all of them from Wenzhou, a port city south of Shanghai. For the Chinese, the culture shock was more modest than one might have expected. And it goes on and on and on of how they really, really grew up and multiplied, brought more in, and it says they came in really as bottom line workers, and then started getting small business, even starting in garages and things, and then built up and got factories, stacks of factories. They liked the family in Tuscany business life, and it revolved around small interconnected firms, just as it did in Wenzhou. And so they really took off there. Thousands and thousands of them live there and go back and forth to China, in fact. But it says by the mid-1990s, Wenzhouans were getting up textile businesses and small garages, and then they go into buying big manufacturing businesses. And then they're into designer clothing and the whole thing too. But there's thousands of them living there now permanently. So there's obviously a connection too, because a lot of them were coming back and forth from China all along until it really broke out hard there. As I say, you just really you have to really look and look and look. And it's the same in Canada when you look at the people who, even in the homes out west in British Columbia, it was quite fantastic to find out that many of them had taken trips to Iran. From the old folks' homes. I guess these managed tours to have or something. Others had gone to Egypt. Other ones had gone on the cruise ships. Other ones had gone to China, lost in China, back and forth. And you start to get the connections of different people carrying it back and forth from countries. But isn't it amazing that Canada wasn't even putting its foot down? And I'm not sure if they've even put their foot down yet in international travel. I really don't know. So I'll put these links up anyway for those that want to toss the ideas around their heads. And again, a flock of homeward bound snowbirds landed in Brockville, Ontario, and settled overnight in the Walmart parking lot and so on. It goes up through about the fact too, it says a striking fear amongst Canadians, amongst store employees, because they're supposed to go straight home and so on, and they're going to stores and all that, yada, 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 yada. But again, there's no checks in Canada at all over temperature, sickness, or background, if you felt sick in the last week or something, or whatever. Nothing at all. And it's quite amazing. Also, Peter Hitchens put a link up to an interview with Professor Sekuret Bakdu. And he is high chutzpah. He's Dr. Sekuret Bakdu, an infectious medicine specialist, the professor. He's one of the most highly cited medical research scientists in Germany, head of the Institute for Medical Microbiology at the Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz, one of Germany's most distinguished seats of learning. And they give the transcript in the article and the link. Also wanted to link. It's also done on YouTube, I think it is too. I'll put that up as well. And it says it was done on the 18th of March. So it says, note, one of the figures he gives for deaths in Germany is now out of date. It is not mistaken. It says, so he talks about coronavirus and spreads over the whole world and what the viruses are. And it says very often infection remains subclinical in coronavirus types without symptoms. Severe courses occur almost exclusively in elderly patients with other underlying illnesses, in particular of lung and heart. And he goes on to give, again, the medical point of view on it that they're all getting taught today. He shows you how it's often you can be mistaken with the numbers that are dying, and why they're getting certain different numbers and discrepancies in the numbers too. Because no one else is born to explain things, you understand? Everybody wants the big graphs and oh my, look at this spikes graph. Oh my God, it's going up and up, and the Malthusian charts, you know. He said, he was talking about Germany, I believe. He says, with only 10,000 infections, that was then, right? 18th March 2020. It says 99.5% have no or only mild symptoms. You see? It says, here we already see that it's false and dangerous to talk about 10,000 patients. They are not seriously ill. Infection is not identical with disease. Of the 10,000 infected people, only 50 to 60 were severely ill. It says 30 died to the present day. So we have apparently mortality rate of COVID-19 positive cases per day up now. The looming worst case scenario that must be prevented, according to authorities, is that we would have 1 million cases and maybe 3,000 deaths, it says, in 100 days. That would mean 30 deaths per day. So he goes through again how, and I'm not going for one way or another way of thinking. I'm saying, and this is definitely, and I'm more suspicious than most folk about this particular disease because it's got different characteristics than previous coronaviruses. Even the fact that it's primarily going for the older folks, primarily going for males, and the effects that it can have on the lungs too are really astonishing. If you get hit with a bad coronavirus, some parts of your lung will never recover. There'll be scar tissue forever. And this is no exception, this one here. You'll lose lung capacity permanently if you survive. However, there are treatments. There's darn good treatments out there too that can stop it pretty fast, but they've got to start giving you the antibiotics, definitely. Because antibiotics, whenever you get the complete storm, basically where your body goes to war against this thing and attacks the disease in the lungs itself, and it brings all its troops and its cavalries and so on into the lungs fast and really saturates it with blood heavily. Then some of the blood will go through the barrier. The alveolar tissue is very, very thin. It's meant for oxygen you pass back and forth with, and it goes CO2 out too. But the fact is, you start getting blood coming out of it too. And then when blood can get in and out of the alveoli tissue and in contact with the air and hemorrhaging, then bacteria set in immediately. And so you've got to be on antibiotics. I hope folk realise that. And hence the thing too, this thing for doctors, you should really stop prescribing antibiotics since about 2015, 16. I saw this coming years ago. Well, isn't it amazing that once you start doing, the doctors don't want to even give you that if you're really ill? You better start looking at this. Get you an advocate, folks. Absolutely. Who will stand by you through thick and thin. As these very well trained, these very good trained bioethicists come up and, well, you maybe have to look at them. Maybe this is, maybe they've had their time here, so, and they're often nice and you like them. They've been well trained how to get through to you. But you can get people. They've got people in their 90s that they're desperate to save in British Columbia, pulling through them, who are now getting discharged. Really. And they've got ways to stop your body massively attacking the lungs. If they want to do it, they can certainly do it, folks. Where they will is a different story according to the list. Your age, oh dear, male, oh dear, and pre-existing condition, oh dear. How valuable are they to society? Do we really need them? Well, not really, well, it's palliative care. I'll put the articles up too, where they're telling the doctors not to give antibiotics if need be from previous years up to the present, as they go through the agenda, of course. And then I'll put up too the invisible quantum dot tattoo could be used to ID vaccinated children, the one that MIT is working with, along with, I think it's Bill Gates, and it's published in Science Translational Medicine. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, yep, of course. Amazing the big agendas this man is. He's such an altruistic person who just wants to, help you all. And then what's the real death rate for the coronavirus? Figures reveal just 0.6% of patients in Germany die, but the rate in Italy is higher than 10% because of a stark difference, to say, in testing regimes. But, well, there's something else going on definitely amongst it in Italy, there's no doubt about it. But in the rest of the world so far, it's been nothing like Mr. Ferguson said it would be, at least in the Western countries. I think Australia's even lower, And Invisible Ink could reveal whether children or kids have been vaccinated as well. That's MIT, the same thing again. Engineers working with the same characters, I'll put that up as well. Another thing too, I won't even go into is the incredible, disgusting postponing of certain medications and so on through political reasons, because, and let's be honest, the big pharma companies are all competing. Do you realize there'll be the billions of dollars at stake per contract? Billions. When we're petrified, oh yeah, they can demand what they want, and the government's going to guarantee that it's going to get paid one way or another, and oh yeah, and some of them are connected to the folk in governments, like the businesses, or their relatives. It's just so sad, isn't it? And they're squabbling and stopping some of the cheaper stuff getting put out right now to try and get their pals with their contracts through for it. It's just incredible, the disgusting behaviour that's going on right now. Paul Craig Roberts actually has an article about that too, I think. I'll see if we can find it and put it up. As they squabble, as folk are really sick or maybe even dying. And that really is about almost it for the night, I guess. I didn't want to rush it through so quickly, but I do want to say this. You have to think for yourselves. This is going, they want to drag this out even further. They're talking about, well, and against trial balloons in real time, very much like The Last Enemy. Very much like The Last Enemy series. Where in real time they could float ideas to the public to see how they'd accept it. And within 5 minutes, through the different algorithms and so on, they could tell in real time, all the social media would be searched. In 5 minutes, they'd know exactly how many folk were for something percentage-wise or against the idea of whatever it happened to be. So they could adjust the thing that trial balloon was for to make it spread over a longer period, to make folk get used to the idea or whatever, or nudge it a little bit. And that's how things are. We're living through that right now, in real time. And they are using all your social media apps and so on as spy mechanisms, and your phones and everything. And they're talking about it openly now. But they've been doing it all along, folks, really. And now, of course, they can give themselves permission. It's to save you. You got to, and there's articles out there too, just like the ones after 9/11. Well, you may have to give up all your privacy for safety. This is identical to 9/11 ones. And the folk will be so terrified, oh, well, I guess so, So whatever happens, this is fulfilling a lot of the agenda. It's the same agenda as sustainability and austerity that came out a few years back from the whole climate group and the whole thing, to do with bringing us down to a basic, simple way of living, and then cutting back on energy, technocracy Inc. idea, cutting back step by step. First take over it all, take it all over, and then cut it back step by step. Once you've taken it over, public-private partnerships is already here, through electricity, heating, fuels and so on. Start cutting it back. This time, they're already talking about maybe brownouts, if they can drag this out for 2 years, this pandemic. All the things I talked about in the early 2000s and onwards to do with brownouts, because they came out with their plan then, they would unroll these things to bring us into austerity. Well, here, bingo, you're watching it all get fulfilled. All of it. If they can't get you to comply with it one way, they'll make you comply with it another way, you see. It's to save you all. We're all in it together, It's for the greater good. So keep your heads. Don't go nuts. Help each other out. You got to help each other out if you know people in the same boat as yourselves. And don't just sit and watch that TV until it terrifies you. It's the greatest tool for terrorizing. You're looking at a system where the media has been lying to you for your whole life about most things. And suddenly they've got you all glued to it. Huh? And they're making stars, supposedly, of doctors that say, wash your hands, cough up your sleeve, don't go closer than 6 feet to anybody, stay in your homes. Making stars out of them, because they'll give little jokes for them to quip on, probably written by writers groups, you see. Everybody out there is PR, public relations, which is the new term they gave for propaganda. It used to be called just basic propaganda. They changed it in Bernays after day to public relations. And public relations, every organization out there, for corporate businesses, for the police, for everything, has public relations. People who will bend all truths or all questions and give you odd answers to anything you ask, but never straight answers on anything. That's their job. But they're making the stars now. There you go. So keep your heads. Don't be drinking yourselves to deaths in your homes, and then you'll be battling each other. Again, after they announced, we're going to make sure you got to keep beer flowing, and you got to keep the drugs going, and the cannabis at home. The police are expecting more domestic violence. I wonder why. You're all going to get shut up for months, maybe. Don't forget, they said at the beginning of this might be like the last big flu one. It might literally go all through this year and into next year. This is what they're hoping for. That's what I see anyway. Because do you realize the money that's getting tossed out there that's never going to be accounted for by the ones who are receiving it? The big corporate ones. So give us this, we might find ways to do this. And massive, millions were given. Millions. Maybe billions, actually. To all the mind managers, all behaviorists. And they've got sites out there telling you about it. From their own sites. And how they're going to help manage you. And tell you what. They even had stuff on, if you're at home, how often to masturbate, for God's sake. I wonder how much they got to put that article out there. Bertrand Russell said, we'd bring in a world, he says, where the people will be unable to think for themselves. They'll be guided by experts for every simple thing, until they can't do anything simply by themselves, without the expert. And bingo, we're here, eh? Bingo. So when you're really feeling bad, listen to some good music. And remember, eventually, one way or another, this will eventually be over. If you can help each other and you have a little pal, a little group of pals, do help each other. Take precautions if you deliver food to each other and so on. And you don't have to go inside their houses. You have to agree with that, and keep each other safe. And for those that can't get to town to do any shopping at all, maybe you arrange for them to do it for them, or things like this, simple things. That's how you get. Don't look to government to help you. It's just the corporations that look to government and expect to help, and certain big political organizations and such. But for yourselves, you have each other. And do your best. Keep safe. It's awfully important you keep safe. But you'll get through it. We'll come through this. Again, if they have their way, it'll be a different system again. And whatever laws they've slapped on with emergency powers will not be taken off, especially to do with whatever privacy was left. And you will have to eventually probably get made to go for, they'll try and make you go for your little chip in the arm and so on eventually. They really want to do that, and it's there. It's no conspiracy theories. MIT's involved in it with the Gates Foundation. And as I say, it's up to you to eventually come out of this and say, no way, get lost. Because where they're taking it with this and because of this is just the same agenda. They're taking it along the same route into totalitarianism. And they've already told you in the last big meeting for the climate change group and the WEF, World Economic Forum, that the people are not listening to our demands of what they must change their behavior and so on. There'll be austerity and yada yada yada. He says, and we'll have to take next steps to try and force them not to continue the way they're with consumerism. And they're also talking about, it might even come down to, it's time now to decide who should have children and should they have children. This is an old agenda. There had books out in the 1920s about this. They never give up because these foundations are eternal. They don't stop. They go on for centuries with their agendas. But again, they always say this too shall pass, the worst of it shall pass. And it's up to people then to demand their rights afterwards and demand inquiries into why a lot of people were not treated with the right medications and so on. And lawsuits must start flying now. That, you know, and get at the politicians too, who allowed all this kind of thing to happen because they didn't do the quarantining right off the bat, and they didn't tell the people that they had certain treatments which you could certainly give them. And again, more lawsuits for the politicians that held back the treatments because they wanted their own pals and the different pharma companies to get the contracts once they had their versions of whatever happened to be drugs on the market. So that's what you got to do. You know that this is disgusting what's happening right now. Absolutely. Everyone is locked down, and we've been locked down for a while now. Well, international aircraft still come and go. What's going on here? We're all locked down while they bring more and more in. And if they had done quarantine to begin with, literally, you wouldn't have the lockdown. There was no excuse for the lockdown. So I think that's why they kept bringing them people in. Obviously, it's like getting a loading dose enough. And okay, that's fine. Now we've reached the loading dose, and now we'll quarantine the people. We've got to stop thinking they're just stupid at the top, you know. We've got to stop doing it. But as I say, the money has been. Do you realize it's all get paid back by the people, the taxpayers? All these trillions of dollars, and there's no follow up to see if folk come up with vaccines or whatever. Or, you know, it's just astonishing what's happening. But anyway, as I say, remember, folks, I'll put up the whole talk at cuttingthroughmatrix.com, and I might split it into two again in case folk want to have this part one, part two. I don't know just yet. Remember, you can send a few bucks my way, hopefully, at cuttingthroughthematrix.com website, and you can use PayPal. You can also send cash if you want to. You still take cash. That can be washed and laundered, believe you me, without ruining the money. And the mail is still going, although they say it may be a bit slower, you know, but the actual letter mail is still going for the time being. And folk are still accepting cash in the stores. They don't like it so much, what they're told. But again, another part of the agenda is to eliminate cash, as you know. But as long as folks still keep using it, it makes it a bit harder for them just to drop it. So don't get crazy. Don't drink yourself into the boondocks, basically, and don't drug yourself into it either. Listen to some good music or watch some movies that you've got saved by there that are a bit more uplifting, and stop looking at the daily hype by the same faces that are supposedly be specialists and that. And it reminds me, they made Greenspan a star too, you know, the man who used to come out, this little fella that would come out and everybody hushed, and they would actually announce on TV he's coming out to speak, and everybody's hushed, and he would just tell me the stock market. All he would say is, "Cool it." Probably written by his team behind him, you know, for Hollywood effect. Cool it, meaning the stock market, and he'd walk away again. Then they'd go over, oh my God, the genius has spoken. He said, "Cool it." Wow, you know, the genius, the man who literally didn't believe that anything was real. There's a kind of religion he was going through at the time. It was a big fad. Well, that nothing was real. Everything you saw was brought into you through senses into your brain. So even if your senses were wrong, who's to say you even had senses? Because everything's happening inside your brain. It's all getting made up inside your. He did an interview about that before they made him Federal Reserve head. And he says, no, he says to the guy, he said, "How do you know that anything's real?" "How do I know?" He says, "That even you're real," he said to the interviewer. And that's why they made him the chairman of the Federal Reserve, because he looked at all the debt and it wasn't real either. There you go. From myself, Alan Watt from Ontario, Canada, it's good night. May your God or your gods go with you.